Hello and welcome back to Obscura. So, in this, we will be looking at the Indianization of Southeast Asia. So, what exactly is Indianization? Well, it refers to the influence that India and Indian states had on the culture and politics of a particular place, and in this aspect, about Southeast Asia. So, Southeast Asia has seen the largest of Indian influence throughout its history, so much so that even today, the largest country of the Southeast Asia, Indonesia, is literally named the Indian Islands. Indonesia literally means the Indian Islands. So, why was Indianization even a thing? Um, so, it happens that India had a large population even back then, and India was a prosperous country. India had rich maritime history, heritage. India had a rich culture. India had a large influence in art, culture, and was a rich country in together. In like every kingdom of India were rich by any standard of the world, and you can see them throughout India's rich dotted temples and other large palaces or whatever remains of those era. For example, well, in the first episode, we have looked around the Chola invasion of the Ganges, the expedition to the Ganges. The Cholas were also one who has played a major role in the Southeast Asia as well. You can see the grandeur of the temples. You can see the Pallava dynasty, the Chalukya dynasty, and even their precursors. Um, you can see those riches, and so much so that there are literally um, five, different sites, UNESCO World Heritage Site in and around the same region, around the region of uh, Hampi. Then there is Belur and all these places of Karnataka. There are Pattatikal and all these Badami. So there are all these temple clusters from different era in and around the same place. So that really shows how rich Indian culture was. Let alone North India, there are so many temples, so many heritages. So the same thing happened that when Southeast Asia had a large population, large outburst of population, they wanted to have someone who can help them, and India was a natural look for them because India was a trading partner for them, Indian kingdom that is. So the first state to be modern Indianized was Funan. But before that, let's talk about the political structure that they followed. So one of the major parts of of you know taking inspiration from India that it did was the mandala system. So basically, what happened is they had large clusters of uh, city states, basically something that is inspired from the early kingdoms of the Janapadas and Mahajanapadas. So in those era, there were the city states which expanded, which covered a lot of area, and those city states had control over the other small villages and towns. So that same model was followed, where there were some centers of learning slash excellence slash power, and the other kingdoms around, they would pay a fee and they were protected from the other uh, neighboring city states. So that was how the power structure and started. And also, if you see today, the even today or back then, there are some states which are even today the major power centers in the Southeast Asia. For example, Bangkok. So Bangkok, just somewhere near Bangkok, there is the city of Ayodhya, and Ayodhya literally means Ayodhya, but in the Thai language. And Ayodhya kingdom was one of the last major kingdoms before the advent of the Europeans. There is the state of Pagan, which were one of the largest empires of Myanmar. So then after that, the power center moved down to Yangon or Rangoon and now to Naypyidaw. Um, and other states such as the Champa Kingdom of Vietnam, they had their power influence in what is today the UNESCO World Heritage Site of Bana in around Da Nang state. So that's how the structure formed. That they had the powers, the cities, states, and the other kingdoms were basically vassals under them, and they protected these kingdoms. So now let's talk about the difference of how indosphere and sinosphere worked. While we will have a different video where there will be discussion on Vietnam, which is one of the best examples of showing how sinosphere and indosphere worked. Um, Basically, sinosphere had that these kingdoms were made vassals of the Chinese kingdoms, and they had to pay tax for protection. Indosphere did not work in that same way. India did not make these kingdoms vassals, but rather their influence was on the longer term on the culture and political structure of these places. If you see the Chola invasion that was also discussed in the first one, they did make Kalinga a vassal state of theirs, but they did not do the same for the Pala kingdom. But their influence was seen because after the Pala decline, the next kingdom that was formed, the Sena dynasty, was literally formed by one of the commanders who went in this expedition, stayed there, and formed a kingdom. And the similar was what happened in the Srivijaya. But let's first talk about the kingdoms in a chronological, sort of chronological order. So the first major kingdom to be formed was that of Cambodia's Funan dynasty. So the Funan dynasty is something that you might have heard in the recent while because the ship that was made, the sailing boat that was modeled after a painting in the Ajanta cave, which sailed from India to Oman and back, that is named INSV God India. And God India was a Odia Brahmin sailor whose like main profession was sailing and transporting trade basically between Kalinga and the southeast. So it happened that he was attacked. His fleet was attacked by pirates around the Strait of Malacca, but and his boats were damaged, and he had to take refuge in a remote island. But seeing his bravery and bravery with which he fought, the queen was impressed. Not the queen, the princess was impressed, and they formed the kingdom of Funan together. And that was one of the largest and most influential kingdoms of that time. It was formed around 1 century CE, and that was one of the largest and most notable of the Indianized states in the early era. Then there was the kingdom of Bagan that I mentioned. It started from the city state of Bagan, or which is now known as Bagan, or is it the opposite? I don't know. So Pagan or Bagan that formed the part of the first of major kingdoms of Myanmar, and Myanmar had a lot of influence in the Southeast Asia altogether as well. So the kingdom of Myanmar had influence, and pretty much the entire Thailand, what is today, was also part of the kingdom of Burma. And Burma saw continuous growth and development, and they were only stopped and conquered by the British in what was mentioned in the early video of Assam and Manipur being a part of Burma. So after that, the Treaty of Yandabo that ended the Burma rule. So Burma has been having continuous influence from India slash these kingdoms from those time, from the time of the conference from the city state of Bagan to the Burma kingdom. And next up, there is the kingdom of. There are these kingdoms around the Indonesian region, Malaysia. These were also there was the Malaysian kingdom of Kada. There was Srivijaya kingdom. Java also had, and even today has a large Hindu population. So that was from those days. Java, and also even when these regions converted to Islam, even then they still maintained uh, a large Indian influence. And even today, you see the largest Islamic state by population is Indonesia, but even then, their names are influenced by the Sanskrit heritage that they had. And their national bird is the Garuda. Their national symbol is the Garuda, which is the Vahan of Vishnu. So they have this influence going on, and that is the long-term effect that Indianization had. Next up, moving on, there was the Champa kingdom, which was around the 7th century. They had this influence. So the Champa kingdom is basically from the southern part of in and along the Mekong Delta, which is basically in what is today the Ho Chi Minh City. Um, so this area had these temples. Even today, there are the temples which also are UNESCO World Heritage Sites. So that was the kingdom, and it was basically had ties with the kingdoms of Angkor and formerly Funan. So they had these ties with this kingdom, and they also flourished in what is today South Vietnam. Um, and interestingly, North Vietnam was a part of Sinosphere, so it will be discussed in the next video. Maybe not the next, but someday. Um, and Srivijaya was, well, interesting point, because Srivijaya itself being an Indianized state, it was one of the most powerful kingdoms around the 8th, 9th, 10th century. And in the 10th century, just around 5 years after the Chola invasion or expedition to the Ganges, they launched an attack on Srivijaya. And that was the first time that the islands of Andaman and Nicobar were used. So the Cholas set up a temporary base there. It is not known that why this attack happened. Some say that because the kingdom of Funan slash Angkor, I don't know what kingdom it was back then, but so the king wanted help from them, because the the Strait of Malacca, which even today is one of the most important passages of maritime route, that was blocked. That was not blocked, but like they were being charged exorbitant rates, taxes to pass ships through that place. So, and also back then, these kingdoms of South Asia, not South Asia, in India, they had large trade guilds basically. So the Tamil trade guilds, they influenced a lot of power. Even like they were basically also can be said to be kingmakers as well. They had that much power. So the Cholas had to keep them in, you know, happy. So when they complained, they had to do something. Uh, so that is one of the stories, and the other being that the king wanted help because the king was being troubled by uh, a confluence of the kingdoms of Srivijaya and Ayodhya. So whatever it be, the Cholas launched an attack on the kingdom of Srivijaya, and they took a very different route from what the Srivijaya kingdom thought would be the attack. They were two-pronged attack, um, one from the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and one from behind the kingdom of the island of Sumatra. Basically, the island of Sumatra and the Malay Plain were the parts of this kingdom of Srivijaya. So they took a long route to go on the opposite direction, and then there were two-pronged attack on the island of Sumatra. And well, at the end, the kingdom of Srivijaya, one of the most powerful kingdoms to ever exist in Southeast Asia, was defeated. And then they had to make amends with the Javanese kingdom, which were also Indianized. Now, finally, the kingdom of Angkor. So, the kingdom of Angkor, well, you might be knowing the city-state of Angkor Wat, which also has the largest temple complex in the entire world. They were one of the most prosperous kingdoms to ever exist in what is today modern-day Cambodia. Now, coming to the kingdom of Ayodhya or Thailand. So, firstly, there was the kingdom of the Dwarapara, which was around the 8th to 9th century. And from there was the kingdom of Ayodhya based on the city state of Ayodhya. So they were one of the most prosperous kingdoms around the 14th century CE, um, alongside the well-known kingdom of Vijayawada. So that was one of the last of the major kingdoms alongside Angkor, alongside Bhavan. So these kingdoms existed, and their influence can be said to have diminished once India started diminishing. The southern states had a uh, loss in prosperity, then the constant Mughal attacks, then ultimately conquer of these places by the Mughals under Aurangzeb, the Deccan expedition of Aurangzeb. Then the Maratha kingdom attacked and conquered all the way to Tanjore, which was the capital of the Cholas, and then ultimately European conquest of both India as well as the Southeast. And in fact, the the Southeast Asian state did not have the concept of borders before the Europeans arrived. So they were basically following this mandala system all over, all till the Europeans actually ascended, and that is why mainly the power centers were around these city states, and they did not have a particular boundary. It is also similar in Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka has its own history, of course. Um, let's discuss that in some other day, or yeah. So basically, the Cholas again had some influence, and for around 200 years they ruled Sri Lanka. And also, interestingly, the last kingdom um, to exist before the British took over Sri Lanka was led by an Indian dynasty. So, the kingdom of Kandy, which was the last of the kingdoms of independent Sri Lanka, the last dynasty of that kingdom was actually originated from the Madurai uh, Nayak dynasty. A branch of that came and settled to Kandy, and also that influenced one of the art forms, which was the Kandian art. Kandian art is actually influenced from that dynasty, and that is why it has reminiscence of the Tanjore art paints, and also to the earlier rock paintings of the early paintings of the Mughal era, and even influences from the Ayodhya and Eloda painting. So all these had influence to what was the Kandian art, and also importantly the Kandian state symbol under uh, the Nayak rulers, that lion and symbol with the sword, that is today the flag of Sri Lanka as well. So India had a lot of influence over Sri Lanka as well. While it is not obviously Southeast Asia, it is in South Asia itself. But that really shows the maritime heritage that India has, the influence that India had over these places. So much so that even today there is a lot of influence that can be traced to India. So that's the story of the indosphere or Indianization of the Southeast Asia. Stay tuned for the next video. Thank you.